100 days after his death, there were no red carpets, no cameras, no industry representatives. Only candles, only ordinary people. And a question that refuses to die. The streets were quiet that night. Not the peaceful kind of silence that comes with rest, but the heavy stillness that settles when something has gone wrong and no one dares to name it. In front of temples and along narrow roads, small flames trembled in the dark. People stood close together, strangers bound by a single absence. They did not speak loudly. They did not pose for photographs. They simply lit candles and waited, as if justice itself might appear if they were patient enough. It had been 100 days since Yu Menglong died. In the world of entertainment, time usually works differently. Scandals fade in weeks. Careers recover in months. Names are replaced, faces move on, and the machine continues forward. But this time, something resisted that rhythm. The longer Yu Menglong was gone, the more uncomfortable his absence became. Not because new revelations emerged, but because none did. No hidden vices surfaced. No disgraceful secrets followed him into death. The deeper people looked, the less they found. That, perhaps, was the first sign that this story would not end quietly. We are often told that truth reveals itself with time, that patience rewards those who wait. Yet here, time did something else. It sharpened the contrast. On one side stood ordinary people, holding candles for someone they would never meet. On the other stood an industry that had already moved on, silent and untouched, as if nothing of consequence had happened at all. And silence, in cases like this, is never empty. As memorial gatherings appeared in Taiwan, far from the centers of power, something else was happening in the shadows. Shiqi, once a visible figure, withdrew from public life. His appearances vanished. His concert was cancelled. When his name surfaced online, it did so surrounded by anger, suspicion, and unease. Then, almost on cue, a statement appeared. A former partner denied any connection to him. Completely, unequivocally, as though the past itself could be erased by timing alone. It was difficult not to notice when this denial arrived. Not during success, not when rumors first spread, but now, when reputations were collapsing, when association had become a liability. People began to ask questions they had not dared to ask before. Not about guilt in the legal sense, but about fear. Who was afraid and of what? Why did distance suddenly matter so much? And why did the living seem increasingly unstable, while the dead appeared disturbingly intact? Then came the video. It surfaced without warning. Strange, unsettling. A performance that felt exaggerated, almost ritualistic. Some called it a breakdown. Others saw calculation. A few whispered darker explanations, invoking symbols, sacrifice, and survival at any cost. In an age where reality itself can be manufactured, even the authenticity of the image was questioned. But the timing was undeniable. While the living unraveled in public, Yu Menglong's past did the opposite. It clarified. With every story retold, every small moment recalled, he appeared not flawed, but quietly decent. Almost painfully so. And that raised a far more dangerous question than any rumor ever could. If someone like him could not survive here, what did that say about the system itself? Stay with us. Because what we are about to uncover is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. And then, something disturbing surfaced. A video that made people stop and ask, is this a breakdown? Or a signal? 100 days can reveal more than years of noise ever could. When the attention fades and the cameras turn away, what remains is often more honest than any statement made under bright lights. In this case, what remained were two worlds moving in opposite directions, divided not by geography, but by conscience. In the first world, there were no contracts to protect, no reputations to manage. Only people, ordinary individuals who gathered quietly, long after the headlines had disappeared. They came without banners or slogans. They did not speak of revenge or demand spectacle. They stood with candles in their hands, their faces lit by a fragile glow, as if light itself had become an act of resistance. They remembered Yu Menglong, not as a symbol, but as a person. Someone whose life had ended without answers. Someone who, in death, had been abandoned by the very system that once profited from his presence. These gatherings did not offer closure. They offered something more unsettling: persistence. Across the sea, in places far removed from the centers of influence, these acts of remembrance continued. They were small, easy to ignore, and yet they carried a weight that no official statement could dissolve. Because remembrance, when it costs nothing to abandon, but is chosen anyway, exposes something deeply uncomfortable. In the second world, the silence was louder. Within the entertainment industry, there were no public memorials, no collective reflection, no acknowledgement that anything had gone wrong. Schedules continued. New faces appeared. Projects were announced and promoted with the same mechanical efficiency as before. The system, from the outside, appeared intact. But systems do not require truth to function. They require compliance. As days passed, certain absences became impossible to ignore. Shiqi, once visible, was now rarely seen. His name still circulated, but it did so accompanied by anger and suspicion. A concert scheduled in the aftermath was quietly cancelled. No detailed explanation followed. Just another disappearance, folded into the constant churn of the industry. When he did appear online, the response was immediate and unforgiving. Comment sections filled within minutes, not with curiosity but with accusations. Questions without punctuation. Demands without restraint. The kind of collective pressure that leaves little room for nuance, and even less for retreat. Then came the denial. In the early hours of a December morning, a statement surfaced from an unexpected source. A former partner, previously silent despite months of speculation, suddenly declared that there had never been a relationship at all. The language was precise, absolute. It left no space for ambiguity. What made this moment striking was not the denial itself, but its timing. Photographs had circulated earlier in the year. Sightings, shared outings. Details that at the time were met with silence rather than correction. Back then, there was no urgency to clarify. No legal language. No sudden insistence on distance. Now, with reputations under threat and consequences becoming real, separation was declared as fact. Among observers, a familiar proverb resurfaced, one that appears whenever crises expose loyalty as conditional. When disaster strikes, each person looks for their own way out. The statement did not calm speculation. It intensified it. To many, it suggested not innocence, but fear. A fear severe enough to demand public erasure of the past. And fear, when visible, often points to something larger beneath the surface. As this distancing unfolded, another development drew attention. A video emerged, circulating rapidly across platforms. In it, Shiqi appeared dancing. The movements were exaggerated. The expressions strained. There was a theatrical quality that unsettled viewers almost immediately. Some watched in silence. Others replayed it, trying to decide what they were seeing. Was this collapse, a mind unraveling under relentless pressure, or was it something else entirely? An act. A performance designed to confuse, distract, or perhaps even provoke sympathy. The internet, as it often does, divided itself into camps within hours. More restrained voices urged caution. They pointed out that the movements resembled elements of traditional dances from Southeast Asia. That unfamiliarity alone could create discomfort. That not every strange image signaled madness. But restraint rarely dominates in moments like this. More extreme interpretations followed. Some suggested that the calmness beneath the chaos was the most disturbing element. That only someone utterly detached or utterly protected could perform in such a way while the world closed in. Others invoked darker language. Words like sacrifice, transaction, soul. In an era where artificial intelligence can fabricate convincing realities, another question emerged. Was the video even real, or was it constructed, altered, generated to manipulate perception at a critical moment? The possibility alone added another layer of uncertainty to an already fractured narrative. What mattered most, however, was not the answer. It was the effect. The video did not resolve suspicion. It deepened it. It shifted focus away from clarity and toward spectacle. Away from accountability and toward confusion. And in that confusion, the central absence grew heavier. Because while attention fractured around the living, something unexpected was happening with the dead. The more people examined Yu Menglong's past, the less darkness they found. No hidden scandals emerged. No disgraced acquaintances stepped forward. No financial improprieties surfaced to explain his fall. Instead, small stories accumulated. Quiet gestures, unremarkable moments that, taken together, painted a picture of someone increasingly rare within such an environment. This contrast became impossible to ignore. On one side, visible instability, distancing, and performance. On the other, a life that, even under scrutiny, remained intact. And that contrast raised a question that no statement could silence. If the problem were one individual, the system would have expelled them and moved on. But if the problem were the system itself, then the response would look exactly like this. Distance, silence, distraction. And then, something disturbing surfaced. A video that made people stop and ask, is this a breakdown? Or a signal? There is a pattern investigators learn to recognize early. When someone falls, the search usually begins with their flaws. Hidden vices, private excesses, compromises that finally surface under pressure. It is an almost reflexive instinct, rooted in the belief that destruction must be earned in some way. Yu Menglong defied that pattern. As attention intensified, people searched his past with the expectation of discovery. They combed through interviews, old footage, second-hand accounts. They looked for contradiction, hypocrisy, anything that could explain why his career had stalled so abruptly before his death. What they found instead was something far more unsettling. Consistency. Accounts from colleagues did not conflict. Stories from fans did not fracture under scrutiny. Even minor forgettable moments aligned into a portrait that resisted corrosion. Yu Menglong appeared not perfect but decent. And in an environment where performance often replaces character, decency stood out like an anomaly. One story, shared quietly and repeatedly, became emblematic. At a public event, Yu Menglong stood as cameras gathered. Behind him, a small child strained to be seen, rising on their toes, trying to appear within the frame. Aya noticed immediately. Without prompting, without spectacle, he stepped backward and to the side, allowing the child to move forward into view. It was an insignificant gesture by industry standards. There were no headlines. No praise followed. Yet beside that child stood another adult, pushing subtly, angling for attention, guarding visibility as if it were a scarce resource. The contrast was never acknowledged aloud. It did not need to be. In systems governed by competition, small moments reveal more than grand statements ever could. Yu Menglong was described as frugal, even when his income increased. Respectful toward his parents. Methodical in his work. He arrived prepared. He did not demand exceptions. Those details, often dismissed as public relations narratives, held under scrutiny because they were consistent across environments where cameras were absent. This was not the image of someone who failed because of negligence or indulgence. It was the image of someone who failed because he refused to adapt to rules that were never written, yet universally enforced. According to multiple accounts, the turning point came with a refusal. An offer, framed as opportunity, presented through implication rather than contract. The kind of arrangement that never exists on paper, yet defines access within closed circles. Yu Menglong declined. What he refused was not simply an individual proposition. He refused a symbol, a gate. Entry into a network where advancement depends less on merit than on compliance. And refusal, in such systems, is interpreted not as integrity, but as defiance. The consequences followed predictably. Projects were reassigned. Promises evaporated. Communication grew cold. Words like burden and liability replaced earlier praise. It was not an attack in the open. It was erosion. Slow, deliberate, and difficult to prove. What happened to Yu Menglong was not unique. It was merely quieter. To understand the environment he faced, it is necessary to listen to those who survived by stepping away. One such voice emerged shortly after his death. A veteran actor, respected but increasingly absent from mainstream productions, spoke openly about why he no longer appeared on screen. He did not cite declining skill. He did not blame age. He described an ecosystem built on social rituals. Endless dinners, empty conversations. The obligation to flatter those with power. Attendance mattered more than ability. Absence, regardless of talent, was punished. At those tables, he explained, nothing of value was discussed. Yet failure to appear marked one as uncooperative. Newcomers suffered most. Those whose popularity waned disappeared entirely. Only when success returned did invitations follow again. The cost, he said, was not merely professional. It was physical, psychological. The strain of maintaining a false self eventually drove him away from film and television altogether. He returned to traditional theater, accepting obscurity in exchange for autonomy. Another figure illustrated the same rule from a different angle. A woman who had worked steadily for more than 2 decades. Dozens of roles. No scandals. No manufactured romance. Early in her career, a producer hinted that understanding the unspoken rules could open doors. She responded by stating she was there to discuss the script, nothing else. She lost the role. Her career did not collapse. It simply plateaued. Recognition remained modest. Financial rewards limited. She lived carefully. Quietly. Content to bargain at local markets far removed from red carpets. Her integrity preserved her sense of self, but it cost her visibility. Not everyone can afford that trade. For younger artists bound by restrictive contracts and severe penalties for breach, refusal carries heavier consequences. They cannot simply leave. They are managed, controlled, and monitored. When they resist, pressure intensifies. Marginalization becomes isolation. Isolation becomes despair. In this context, Yu Menglong's story stops being an anomaly. It becomes an illustration. The system did not break him by accident. It applied pressure until resistance became unsustainable. And when the outcome turned irreversible, the response was not reflection, but erasure. Silence protects structures. Distraction preserves hierarchy. Those who benefit do not need to conspire. They only need to continue as usual. Which leads to a question more unsettling than any accusation. So the question is no longer who killed Yu Menglong. The question is, how many others were destroyed the same way and survived in silence? Systems that endure rarely rely on overt violence. They survive by perfecting methods that leave no visible bruises, no clear fingerprints, no singular villain who can be named and removed. Their power lies in repetition, in expectation, in teaching those within them what happens when the rules, though unwritten, are ignored. By the time Yu Menglong reached his final months, the pressure surrounding him no longer needed to be spoken. It was already understood. Opportunities did not vanish overnight. They thinned. Meetings were postponed. Promises dissolved without explanation. Silence replaced dialogue, and silence in this industry is a language of punishment. We have seen this pattern before. Not in isolated scandals, but across decades of testimonies whispered off record. Young performers enter the system believing talent will be enough. They are told to be patient, to trust the process. What they eventually learn is that patience is often code for submission, and process is another word for control. Contracts play a crucial role in maintaining this balance. They are presented as protection, yet function as restraints. Penalties for breach are severe. Autonomy is limited. Public image is owned, curated, and weaponized. When compliance is rewarded, resistance becomes expensive. When resistance persists, consequences escalate quietly. For someone like Yu Menglong, leaving was not a realistic option. His agency held authority over his career, his schedule, and his future. To refuse cooperation within such a framework is to accept isolation without escape. Each rejection compounds. Each missed opportunity reinforces the narrative that the individual is difficult, ungrateful, or unstable. Once that narrative takes hold, it spreads efficiently. Calls stop being returned. Invitations disappear. Projects proceed without explanation. None of these actions are illegal. None require coordination. Each decision taken alone appears insignificant. Together they form a barrier no individual can cross alone. This is how systems erase people without acknowledging that they ever existed. After Yu Menglong's death, the response followed the same logic. There were no public investigations initiated by industry bodies. No collective statements expressing concern. No pauses for reflection. The machine continued to operate, unchanged. If anything, the speed with which attention shifted elsewhere suggested relief. Relief that the discomfort had passed. Relief that no one was asking questions that demanded answers. Yet beneath that surface calm, cracks appeared. Shiqi's behavior, whether genuine or performative, exposed instability that could not be fully managed. The sudden denials of association revealed anxiety rather than confidence. These were not actions of a system certain of its innocence. They were signs of containment. Containment is not about truth. It is about limiting damage. In moments like these, systems often sacrifice individuals to preserve structure. The focus shifts toward personalities, toward spectacle. Public attention is redirected away from mechanisms and toward behavior. Madness is easier to discuss than misconduct. Performance distracts more effectively than policy. The strange video did exactly that. It fractured discourse. Some debated mental health. Others argued over authenticity. Still others indulged in conspiracy. The core issue, systemic exploitation, slipped further into the background with each passing hour. And yet, there was something the system could not control. Memory. Despite the absence of official acknowledgement, Yu Menglong's name persisted among those who had nothing to gain from remembering him. Fans continued to gather. Candles continued to burn. Each act, small and private, defied the industry's preferred outcome, forgetting. What made this persistence threatening was not its scale, but its intent. It did not demand spectacle. It demanded accountability. It refused to accept that silence equaled resolution. In darker interpretations, some observers began to describe the situation using spiritual language, not because they believed in literal possession, but because the behavior resembled ritual, an offering made to stabilize a larger entity, a life reduced to a lesson, a warning embedded in tragedy. In many cultures, rituals serve to restore balance after transgression. Here, the balance restored was not moral, but operational. The system survived. Careers adjusted. Control remained intact. But rituals leave residue. They imprint themselves on those who witness them, on those who sense, even without proof, that something deeply wrong has been normalized. And normalization, once recognized, is difficult to unsee. The industry may move forward, but it does so carrying this mark. Not visible, not acknowledged, yet present in every calculated silence, every sudden denial, every performance that feels slightly too rehearsed. Yu Menglong did not disappear because he lacked talent. He did not fall because he failed to adapt. He was removed because he represented a variable the system could not safely absorb: integrity without leverage. And systems that rely on leverage cannot tolerate that kind of presence. So the question that lingers is not whether justice will come in the form people expect. It is whether enough individuals will recognize the pattern before becoming part of it. Because once a system learns it can erase someone without consequence, it will repeat the process. And the next time there may be no candles left to light. 100 days passed, and with them came a familiar temptation. The temptation to believe that time itself resolves injustice. That absence dulls responsibility. That silence, if maintained long enough, becomes an acceptable substitute for truth. This case challenges that belief. Yu Menglong did not leave behind a trail of scandal or confession. He left behind a void. A space where answers should exist, but do not. In that void, patterns speak louder than statements. The withdrawal of allies, the sudden denials, the strategic distractions. None of these actions prove guilt on their own. Together they reveal something more durable than any accusation. They reveal how power behaves when threatened. Throughout this story, no official conclusion has been reached. No courtroom has weighed evidence. No authority has declared wrongdoing. And yet, the absence of judgment does not equal the absence of meaning. Some truths do not arrive with verdicts. They emerge through repetition, through the quiet consistency of how systems protect themselves. We have seen what happens to those who refuse to adapt. Opportunities evaporate. Support recedes. The individual is reframed as difficult, unstable, or expendable. This reframing does not require conspiracy. It requires only that enough people choose comfort over confrontation. In such environments, responsibility dissolves. Everyone participates, yet no one feels accountable. Each decision is small, each silence defensible. The result, however, is cumulative and irreversible. Yu Menglong's death did not disrupt the system. It affirmed it, and still something resisted. Beyond contracts and control, beyond narrative management and public distraction, memory persisted. Candles burned without permission. Prayers were offered without audience. People who had nothing to gain refused to forget. Their actions did not demand spectacle. They demanded recognition. Recognition that a life ended under pressure. Recognition that integrity can become a liability. Recognition that survival within certain systems requires compromise, and that refusal carries consequences few are prepared to face. The industry may continue forward unchanged. New names will rise. Old controversies will fade. On the surface, stability will return. But stability achieved through silence is not resolution. It is postponement. Because systems that are never questioned do not reform. They repeat. The story of Yu Menglong is not singular. It is representative. A case study in what happens when talent and integrity are insufficient defenses. When survival depends not on what one can do, but on what one is willing to surrender. We are often asked to move on, to let time heal what it has merely covered. But moving on without understanding ensures recurrence. Silence does not protect the innocent. It protects the structure that benefits from their disappearance. And so the question remains, unanswered and unavoidable. 100 days have passed. The industry wants silence. But silence has never protected the innocent.